Hello, my name is Jeff Jamil, and today I'd like to talk about freedom is not free, or you could call it you can't fix stupid. Take it where you want to go with it. I'm in the United States, so I'm going to talk briefly about the United States. We are so far detached, or just so far away from what the original Constitution said. It's not even funny. But I'm not a constitutional scholar. I am not. I do know for the last 50 years, right now they're going through a little bit of restructuring, I guess you'd say, of the federal government. What's interesting about that is that a lot of that stuff is all stuff from the 1950s, by the way, 40s and 50s. If you look at the income tax and all that disgustingness, that all came from the World War II as a method to pay for it. It wasn't ratified by the states, so technically you shouldn't actually have an IRS. By the way, there's no legal authority to actually tax. The federal government has no legal authority to tax individuals. It can actually, the only reason it can tax businesses is because it requires you to have a license. And it's the same what the state does to you, by the way. You technically have no legal rights to it. I heard the other day, which made me laugh, and they're doing something with property tax. Because property tax is actually illegal too. The only people that pay property taxes are businesses. Oopsie. But what I was originally getting at is freedom is not really free. Over the years, if you look back at the 40s, World War II, people were appalled, at what happened to America because, we wanted everything to be good. We went through a traumatic time of war and we want everything to be good, so we're willing to put a little bit of extra money. Well, here's the really crazy news. During World War II, right after that, we rebuilt Japan, like literally rebuilt it. We rebuilt Germany and had a Cold War. So we spent an awful lot of money that we didn't actually have to spend. As much as it's not my money, per se, it's all fake money at that point. Well, actually, before 1970, that was actually real money. 1970, they got you off the silver standard and onto no standard. So you were on gold, now you went to silver. I think World War II put us onto silver. And then at that point, silver standard died in 1970, and you became complete fiat, which means they can print whatever they want, they can do whatever they want, and your money is about as good as toilet paper. Not to be mean, but that's really how that one went. What's interesting about the federal system, like I said, I want to pick on everybody, but is the fact that there was state rights. And we don't have it anymore. There's a lot of federal government impinging on that because, to be honest with you, if I don't like the educational systems in Pennsylvania, I can go over and physically move my location to a new state to get a better education system. That's the way historically it has always been. Some states had better, some states had worse. Whether it be healthcare, whether it be economies, whatever it may be. There's always trade-offs in everything. Example is you live in Vermont. Well, you clearly like trees because there's a lot of trees there. Oh yes, I love trees. But as I said, when the federal government got involved in all this, they've made more and more laws about more and more things. And largely everything became illegal. You sitting here in a parked car in your driveway actually is illegal. It's actually illegal for you to be walking down the street because you need to have a purpose for you walking down the street because otherwise there's laws against that. It's that very, very weird that everything is against the law. But yet, look what they're getting rid of. What really thrills me is that we're getting our freedom back. We just don't know it. Because eventually they're going to get rid of the IRS because it was never ratified and it was actually completely illegal what they were doing to you. Just like it's illegal for property tax. because we're back to only people that are paying property taxes are actually commercial businesses because they're a commercial entity. Only corporate stuff gets to pay taxes. Income tax, no, never was such a thing. Oddly enough, there was a time when tariffs actually ran the government, and we're more likely going back to that. Or we're going to go to a much simpler system of flat tax across the board, which I don't know who you talk to, everyone's in for that. Even, oddly enough, even the filthy rich are in for that. Reason is because their numbers, because it's a fixed rate across the board. You know, if you say 10%, that's a lot. I go, well, it's not a lot at all. Just think of it this way. If you had $1 million in your hand right now, what would you buy? Oh, you go buy a house, you buy a yacht, whatever you want to buy. Think about that. You are making jobs by buying other people's stuff. Rich people do that too. You know, I'm not a class warfare kind of person. But at the same time, how much money do rich people spend to hide their money because they don't want to pay 30%? 10% is not worth them even hiding. 10%, I'll be blunt. Here's the biggest disgustingness about taxation and actually about everything right now is no matter what happens, the economy is going to blow up. Let me explain why. Think about green energy. Okay? You want to go to green energy. Problem is you can't enforce any of it. If you come over and say, okay, starting January 1st of next year, only green energy, there's no gasoline. Okay? So now, immediately pay attention to what you just did. Because now, 1/3 of the economy is out of business. Because they depend on that. That is literally their line of work. Whether it be gas, whether it be things associated with gas or those with automobiles. No different than electricity. No different than pick energy sector. 1/3, or I'd say like what, 10%, 15% of the population is unemployed immediately. No one wants that. Same thing here. You know, what are you gonna do when you get rid of the IRS? That means no H&R Block. No, well, technically there still is an IRS. It still would deal with corporate taxes because they're not paying their fair share. You know, people shouldn't be paying anything. You know, essentially, corporates are paying for the right to operate as a corporate. That's kind of how that works. Instead, we're paying for the right to work for money. So, anyway, technically, if you actually look at the Federalist Papers, because we had a constitution, we didn't really have a government yet. And the Federalist Papers basically talked a lot about what things should happen and how the country should be set up. Really, they did not want a real big federal government with a lot of control at all. At the same time, what's really funny is in the Federalist Papers, it actually says that you're not supposed to have a standing army either, because a standing army causes trouble. Remember, back then, this is 1776. Standing armies cause trouble. You know, look at Napoleon. If they're sitting around, they're just waiting to cause trouble. Why would you want to do that when you can have people that, people that are farmers, people that do things right. I wouldn't say it's right, but do things, have a different occupation. The word I was looking for is militia, because that's really what they wanted. They wanted a big militia, very, very small army. Generally, the army was only for the borders. That was it. There was not a real big need for an army, because who'd want to invade? Everyone has a gun, It's kind of like the logic in America. Anyone who invades America already knows that about 20% of the population have guns. I wish it was a bigger number, but it was not. Those are only the legal registered guns, by the way. God knows how many illegal ones are. But for the most part, from the federal side, there was always this idea that states, and you can change states. I said I don't like the medical care that I get in Massachusetts. I can move to Ohio. You can always do that. Mind you, your tax money goes with it because your revenue went with it because usually you had a farm or you owned a business. So all that went away with it. So needless to say, they really wanted to court you to keep you to stay. But realistically, you've always had the power to leave. Problem is everyone just kind of hunkered down and where they were, never really left. If that was the case, when my youth, I lived in New York State. I left when I figured out the math on my taxes and found out that I was losing 60% of my income to taxes and fees every year. So when you're making $40,000 a year, think about the math on that. And literally, you're living in poverty essentially. And $40,000 a year in Buffalo is considered a good job. Yet every year, you own a $30,000 house, and you're paying literally $2,000 a year in property tax on it. Excuse me, wow. That's the point. Oddly enough, I moved to Texas years later, got a $350,000 house, and I was paying less taxes. They were talking about raising it 0.25%, and they were going to burn City Hall down. In Buffalo, 0.25%. Actually, it goes up 2 or 3% every year because no one's moving to Buffalo. Anyway, that's what I'm talking about. From a freedom perspective, we always have the freedom of free will with the freedom of choice. We generally don't always exercise it, but we generally have it. Eventually, when the federal government starts paring things down, the states are going to have to act also because I hate to be the bearer of bad news. From the federal side of fence, they're the ones that have the authority to do more to you than the state. The state usually takes a lot more money than they should, a lot more. Government was always meant to be local. It was never meant to be state. Literally, you were meant to send your politicians to, the state house for 1 week or 1 week a year or 1 month a year. Same thing with the feds. You only send them a month. What other trouble they cause them then? Because politicians are politicians. So the full-time politician and the professional, somehow, administrators, you look at the bureaucrats that work for all these government agencies. Why are they there? Realistically, it was never even envisioned having bureaucracy. The only bureaucracy you had, if any, was local. And it was minimal. And somehow, we ran a country. So, I don't get it. But I do know that eventually it's all going to trickle back. The bad news about that is approximately 1/3 to a half the population is going to be unemployed. No offense, a bureaucrat actually has no skills. Just throwing it out there. It's not to be mean to bureaucrats. But when you push papers and you don't have to push papers anymore, what do? You become a lobbyist? Oh, wait, there's no need for lobbyists anymore. As I said, there's a lot of bad money in the system. That's not even talking about corruption or anything else. Because I'll guarantee you in the federal system there's a lot of corruption. I'll guarantee you in the state there's a lot of corruption. God knows how many people are getting your Social Security right now. You don't get a statement every month that says, this is what you're withdrawing, do you? You can't even go check, can you? Oh. Yeah. Anyway, what I'm getting at is freedom is not free. And unfortunately, over the years, we actually have eroded our own rights, actually, by giving them away to the state and to the government. The good news is, slowly, this is all going away. The Lord has told me, and the Lord has told many, that this is a restructuring year. Dark to light. You get to see the dirty stuff that they've been hiding for years. We're back to, it's not like they haven't been doing it for 50 plus years. Difference is someone decides they wanted to, They don't want their money to be worth toilet paper. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to be sexy. It's not going to be pretty. What's going to happen? The revaluation of the money alone is going to have bad effects on everybody. Today you have $100 in your hand. Tomorrow, you now at this point have $10 in your hand. But the problem is that $10 is real money now. It's probably gold backed. It has to be gold backed because otherwise we won't be able to trade with anyone else. And that's what they're not telling you either. So eventually you'll have a gold backed dollar. The good news about that $10 you got in your hand versus the $100 you used to have in your hand is that gold backed dollar, that $10, can now buy you a whole week's worth of groceries now. Because everything else got revalued down also. It's not just the money. Now, the bad news about that is, yes, that means labor got removed also. That means at this point, what used to cost, the loaf of bread that cost $4 now costs back 30 or 40 cents. That also means the labor on there went down too. That means now you're making $5 an hour, but $5 an hour now buys you things. That's what people forget, is it's all relative. I remember when I worked at Westinghouse Corp, and it was a union shop, and they made industrial rectifiers there at Buffalo Power Electronics. And literally, their contract said that if minimum wage went up, their wages went up percentage-wise. So in other words, if it went up 10% or 50% minimum wage, their money went up that much. So essentially, they're not going to lose any buying power, as they call it. I go, the problem is you are dictating to a company how much you have to be paid. But the problem is I can't sell the product for that much. And that's what started the company going down a spiral, a real bad spiral. These bad union contracts. And it's not just a union, don't get me wrong. No offense. I went to work for a Fortune 500 company. 95% of the company was age 60 and above, like retirement age. The next youngest, I was the youngest person there. The next youngest one above me, was 35. And I was working I was 30. The next one above that was 50. And then they went to the 60s. There's not a lot of people that were working there. But all of them were union. All of them were very heavy, no skill other than what minimal they had. I'm not picking on unions. I'm not picking on unskilled jobs. It was just interesting when, on my side, because I was a computer person, and we had to figure out what the real numbers are. When we say we're going to make something, Westinghouse had this time scheduling thing. They call it ERP, Enterprise Resource Processing. We had to figure out what the numbers are, because in Westinghouse logic, if I take 3 people and I put them on a job, on one task, it takes 1/3 the time. Which, we put the numbers in there, they're never adding up. We finally got to be within 10% of accurate when we said one thing, that there is one person out working out in a shop. 1 hour a day. Then the numbers were within 10%, which is kind of troubling because everything was, time studied of how long things would take. It's crazy. Can't figure out why they no longer build those things anymore. It's just not cost effective anymore. So when a division was sold, it was cost effective, and because of bad dealings, it was ineffective. Now they just do renewable parts. So they don't even make really anything anymore. So they don't make the $1 million rectifiers. That all went to a different company, which is a shame. But when you make bad decisions, you make bad decisions. And in business, when you make bad decisions, you get bad outcomes. For some reason, when you make bad decisions in government, you kind of get rewarded. And you kind of keep making bad decisions. And that's kind of what we're correcting right now. So as much as freedom is not free, it took us a long way to get to be free. And we're going to be free eventually. God wants us to be free. God is probably shocked as to why it took so long, because people are like asleep on this. But it is what it is. I'd like to thank you for listening, and have a great day.